Welcome to our students and faculty, St. Rose community, and special guests. Please be sure to turn off your electronics at this time. And can you all hear me? Very well, thank you. I'm delighted that you are all here to welcome our esteemed visiting artist, Michael Bierut. And I'd like to acknowledge the Visiting Artist Program for providing partial funding for tonight's presentation. I'd like to express my appreciation for our continued dialogue with Pentagram Design. Michael Bierut is the third Pentagram partner that we have exhibited at St. Rose. Others include Paula Scher and Woody Pirtle. For more than a year, I have worked closely with Michael's top-notch assistants. Tamara McKenna provided necessary cooperation in planning and scheduling. Thanks to Tracy Cameron for preparation of the exhibit and signage, and a special thank you goes to Hamish Smythe, who some of you got to meet. He worked closely with me throughout the development of the exhibition, the production of the invitation, and the exhibition poster. He's been steadfast and good-humored all along the way. And Hamish personally assisted with the layout of the exhibition and met with our graphic design classes to offer his career perspectives and answer questions about his work at Pentagram. And finally, I'd like to express my gratitude, our gratitude to Michael Bierut for his enthusiasm and commitment to the exhibit and lending us a selection of 3 decades of work and 15 of more than 90 of his notebooks. Looks like number 93 here. He's certainly one of the most important designers of our time, as well as a great communicator and a role model for our students. Michael Bierut studied graphic design at the University of Cincinnati's College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning, graduating summa cum laude in 1980. Prior to joining Pentagram in 1990 as a partner in the firm's New York office, he worked for 10 years at Vignali Associates, ultimately as vice president of graphic design. Bierut's clients at Pentagram have included the Alliance for Downtown New York, Benetton, the Council of Fashion Designers of America, Alfred A. Knopf, Walt Disney Company, Mohawk Paper Mills, Motorola, Miller Coors, the Toy Industry Association, Princeton University, Yale School of Architecture, New York University, the Fashion Institute of Technology, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, the Library of Congress, the Museum of Sex, and the New York Jets. No comment. His projects have ranged from the design of I Want to Take You Higher, an exhibition of this on the psychedelic era for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum, to serving as design consultant for United Airlines. Recent activities have included the development of a new identity and signage for the expanded Morgan Library and Museum, the development of environmental graphics for the New York Times building, the design of an identity and public promotion for Philip Johnson's Glass House, the creation of marketing strategies for the William Jefferson Clinton Foundation, the development of a new brand strategy and packaging for luxury retailer Saks Fifth Avenue, and the redesign of the Atlantic magazine. Michael Bierut has won hundreds of design awards, and his work is represented in permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, all in New York, the Library of Congress in Washington, and the Museum of Decorative Arts in Montreal, to name some. He has served as president of the New York chapter of the American Institute of Graphic Arts, the AIGA, from 1988 to 1990, and is president emeritus of AIGA National. He currently serves as the director of the Architectural League of New York and of New Yorkers for Parks. In 1989, Michael Bierut was elected to the Alliance Graphique Internationale. In 2003, he was named to the Art Directors Club Hall of Fame, and in 2006, he received the profession's highest honor, the AIGA Medal, in recognition of his distinguished achievements and contributions to the field. In 2008, he received the Design Mind Award in the National Design Awards presented by the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum Smithsonian Institution. Beyrout is the senior critic in graphic design at the Yale School of Art. He is co-editor of the anthology series, Looking Closer, Critical Writings on Graphic Design, published by Allworth Press, and in 1998, he co-edited and designed the monograph Tibor Kalman, Perverse Optimist. He is a co-founder of the blog Design Observer, and his commentaries about graphic design and everyday life can be heard nationally on Public Radio International Studio 360. Michael's book, 79 Short Essays on Design, which many of you have had in hand tonight, was published by Princeton Architectural Press in 2007. And it's a wonderful read, so if you didn't get a chance to purchase it tonight or you don't have a copy, I would strongly suggest that you get one. You're going to find it pretty fascinating. One of these essays, Graphic Designers Flush Left, has been reproduced on our exhibition text panel just outside the gallery. The essay concludes with these lines: "We can try to compartmentalize our lives, but it's impossible. Graphic designers work with messages, and the messages mean something. We may think we're responsible only for launching those messages, and certainly there's some comfort and profit in thinking that. But if you care about your work, you have to care not only about how it goes up, but where you come down." And I think that really sums up at least a good portion of who Michael Beyrout is. And now I'd like to welcome Michael Beyrout.
Thanks, Jean, and thanks to all of you for coming this evening on a Friday night where there must be other options in Albany than coming to a lecture about graphic design. Some people say no. Well, I appreciate that. It was really an honor way more than a year ago, I think, when we were first contacted by the College of St. Rose with the idea that there might be an exhibition here in your beautiful space across the street. And at that time, I had just given a little talk where for the first time I had shown the insides of some of these notebooks that I have carried around with me for, at this point, 35 years almost. And I was talking to some people in my office, and we thought it might be interesting to do something where we showed some of the notebooks and showed and exhibited some of the work that kind of came out of some of the sketches in the notebooks. And that's what you see now. It took some doing and a lot of hard work that Jean mentioned, almost none of which I had to do. I did the work to produce the notebooks, I think was the hard part, but that was all done by the time the exhibition was getting planned. So tracking down some of the sketches that related to some of the things you see in the walls was kind of the difficult part. And if you look at those notebooks over there, you'll see that these, I signed at least one sketchbook that I think one student had with her, and I was really impressed by how beautiful it was, how much the detail of work and imagination that was in it. I don't think my notebooks are very pretty. I take them to meetings. I write down the things people say in the meetings. If someone calls me on the phone, I write down like phone numbers and things. I write down prices of things. I write down, I do little diagrams of how things are connected. And every once in a while I do like a little doodle that reminds me of, that's meant to sort of remind me of a design idea that I can see in my mind. And I just want to get it down on paper. And so I don't really do, I don't do these as sketchbooks the way that some of you might. I use them in some other way. And in going through them, first for that lecture way back when, and then for this exhibition, I started thinking about what it is that I've learned by working this way and by looking back at the creative process in this way. And at least the art students and the graphic design students here in the audience, all of you go through some sort of process when you've got a problem to solve, some sort of assignment you've undertaken. And I don't think it's the same for any two people. But I've learned a lot from watching my fellow students work back when I was in school, way back a long time ago in the 70s. And on my first job, I learned from watching my fellow designers and especially my boss and my various mentors do their work. And even today, I work in an office that's completely open plan. The partners there, my 5 partners and I, don't have private offices. We all just work out in the open at desks so we can see each other's work. We can see the work that all the designers are doing, and that's very intentional. The idea being that if all you see are the finished things and frames on the walls, you really don't sometimes understand how the ideas are born, how they're nurtured, how they grow, and how they eventually come to maturity, if they ever do come to maturity. So part of this is just meant to be a little bit of a glimpse into that process. And I'm not going to make it particularly long in hopes that there'll be some questions afterwards, which I suspect might be more interesting than what I'll show you now, okay? But with no further ado, this proves that these notebooks actually exist. Sometimes, when I've given this talk, sometimes I only have one such notebook like this, but these are a bunch of them as they existed probably a couple years ago. It would go a little bit higher now. So these are some of the lessons I had. I find that I work best when I kind of hold back and don't go into a situation just dying to design things. I have a colleague who works across the street from me named Stephen Doyle. He works at a place called Doyle Partners, a great, great designer. And I remember him being quoted a long time ago saying that sometimes designers are come into meetings with all sort of ideas in their head, just kind of like dying to get out. And he says they're like puppies who are just kind of peeing themselves. They're so excited. And I took that to heart, actually. And I think it's already my tendency to kind of enter a situation and actually have sort of a blank, try to keep my mind blank. I think it's actually sort of cheating to kind of come to an idea too quickly. So a lot of times I'll go in and I'll just really try to trick, say, if it's a commercial job, try to trick my client into doing the work. Can I get my client to sort of say some things that would be the key to what the design solution might be? And so I'll show you some examples of each of these principles. But this is a notebook that I had with me when I was having my conversations with the Minnesota Children's Museum in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I remember they were saying, they talked about two things quite a bit. They talked about how the museum would be hands-on, and they also talked about how sort of important circles were in the whole thing. They talked about children being in a circle. They talked about people kind of joining hands in a circle. They talked about kind of the circularity and cyclical nature of life. And you can sort of see that I had a lot of ideas that involved like dots and circular forms and balls and things, even as I was like kind of taking down these notes, smiley faces you can see there on the left. I guess that's not an original idea, but I don't make any claims that these things are filled with original ideas. Far from it. Then I had this idea you could exaggerate the size of the dots over the eyes in Minnesota and children. And then finally I sort of had this idea, what if you combine the idea of circles and roundy things with hands to show it could be hands-on. And I remember that little idea you see there on the lower right-hand side of the book is more or less what we ended up doing in the museum. The assignment was to do both a logo, in effect, for the museum and signage for the museum, and we let the latter thing actually create sort of the identity. So the museum doesn't really have an identity except for all these photographs that we commissioned of children's hands manipulating things, including this quintessential red rubber ball, which was sort of that circular global thing that we heard so much about in our early meetings there. So in order to do this, we had a call for children in the community to serve as amateur one-time hand models. So there might have been some professional hand models among them. I don't know. Some of them were good at this, seemingly. And maybe some of them went on to become hand models inspired by this experience, but at the time they were all basically amateur hand models. And we had them just do a whole bunch of different things with balls and with other things. So as you come in, you're greeted with this. We found a typeface that had a nice kind of roundy sort of character as well. Every card there has a different element from the photography session. And then you can see that I find that the architect actually came to similar conclusions, and it was Julie Snow, who was the architect, a really talented woman in Minnesota, who designed this brand new museum for them. And you can see that, like, those round brackets holding the awning, the little ball in front there, the big ball in front there, all those things I think were her way of responding to some of the same stimuli we had gotten. So we both kind of came to a similar place, I think, as we went along. Now, Julie luckily designed a building that had 5 floors, which meant that we could use a child's single hand to demarcate the 5 different floors in the museum. Had it been 6 floors or 11 floors, we would have been in trouble, presumably. And so each floor gets designated with a child's hand and the number. And also we reinforce. Yeah, I listen, then I hear, then I sort of have my idea, and then I sort of will follow through relentlessly with that idea until it just can't go another inch. And so you see that to hold the signs to the wall, we came up with little ball-shaped brackets. Then for the boys' room and the girls' room, you could do other things with hands, I suppose, but we decided to be discreet and just use these official Department of Transportation symbols. You see the bracketing device there. There's a big kind of abstract hand that kind of holds up a clock in the central meeting area of the museum. Beyond that is an auditorium, hand holding a ticket that gets torn in half every time a kid goes in and out of the door. And then at night, the whole identity is celebrated, particularly at the grand opening where they created this banner where the architecture really does merge with the graphic idea. The balls kind of descend and finally turn into a round window that illuminates a big central area they have up on their upper floor there on the right-hand side. One thing I've learned actually looking at these notebooks is sometimes I have lots and lots of ideas, and sometimes the more ideas that I have, the more desperate my process appears to be. I admire people who have lots of ideas and the ideas just get better and better. Sometimes I have one idea at the beginning and it's like the only idea I have, or it's the best idea that I have. And Jean mentioned when she was talking about my background, one of the things I did about 10 years ago was a monograph for a designer named Tibor Kalman, who had a company called M & Company that was very influential. He was a guy that I admired quite a bit. He asked me to do a monograph of his work. It was made all the more the experience was made all the more intense by the fact that he had been diagnosed with cancer, and so in effect we were kind of creating kind of a statement of his life's work. And so he ran a design studio as a designer himself, but I think he felt like he wanted someone else to do the delicate work of actually designing the book and putting the work together. And he has a very funny, great sense of humor, very kind of cynical and kind of idealistic at the same time. Hence the subtitle of the book, which is Perverse Optimist. And for the cover, I had like only one idea, which you see there in the upper right, which is just to take a painting that we had of his face and put it on the front with no other text, and just have the spine of the book be his name, which is a neat 5-letter word, Tibor, T-I-B-O-R, stacked in a line, the way you're not supposed to stack letters, I was always told. However, Tibor used to do this lecture where he would present rules of graphic design and then show how they were broken. So one of them was never stack letters. Then he would show the signage at the facade of the Bauhaus school in Dessau, where it says B-A-U-H-A-U-S, stacked exactly like that. And he had a whole bunch of things like that, and they were pretty persuasive. So this is a little bit of a tribute to that. So the book is like this. That was a painting that he commissioned from an Indian street artist in Calcutta or Bombay or something. And I said I just wanted to look like a cereal box in a way. So it looked like the thing inside was the thing on the front, and so you knew what you were buying when you opened it up. Inside, the layout is very, very straightforward. I wanted to do something very tricky, more like the kind of things that he did, but he asked me to do it because he wanted me to do something in the way I had been trained, which is very straightforward. So Tibor's work was really amazing. He was the art director of a magazine for Benetton called Colors, and I later worked with Bennett and myself and learn what a remarkable client they are. When Tibor invented colors for them, one of the things he did was these just photo essays that a lot of times would work really well with barely any words. It was an issue on race in which he just used it wouldn't be Photoshop then, it would have been old-fashioned retouching to kind of change the races of famous people and just show, say, Queen Elizabeth black, Michael Jackson as Asian, et cetera, et cetera. It was really, really interesting. And in some quarters, outrageous. He invented paperweights that were made out of weighted plastic so that they looked like crumpled pieces of paper, but they actually weighed like as much as a rock and could hold down pieces of paper. Most famous for inventing a whole bunch of crazy watch faces that he sold under the M & Company name. Designed very big books with lots of pages in them. So we just kind of kept a very straightforward layout for that. You know, graphic designers are always on a quest for solutions, and we sometimes forget that problems are your friend, you know. You know, you can't have a solution unless you've got a problem, and sometimes if you can't find a good solution, it's because you've got the wrong problem to solve, and the challenge is how do you define the problem the right way. And I'm a big believer in, I think it's a boring sort of truism, and I can't think of any way to make it any more exciting than it is, except to say sometimes if you have a whole lot of restrictions, they sort of define what the solution is to a certain degree. And in this case, this was a project for the signage for the New York Times building. It's on 8th Avenue in Manhattan, just on the far west side of Times Square. So you know what the New York Times is, right? And you know what 8th Avenue and Times Square is. The New York Times Square is actually named after the New York Times because their headquarters used to be smack dab in the middle of Times Square. But the New York Times is like a sophisticated paper that's won probably more Pulitzers than any other newspaper in the world. And then Times Square is, you know, the entertainment capital of New York, filled with neon signs. And it's not accidentally filled with neon signs either, because what a lot of people don't know is that when Times Square was being modernized in the early 90s, some laws were passed to retain the character of Times Square. These laws require every building in Times Square to have big signs on it. If you're putting up a building in Times Square, you're required by law to put big signs on it. So this is exactly the opposite of most signage restrictions that you find anywhere else in the United States. I guarantee that around St. Rose here, there are, you know, if you wanted to put a giant sign on the outside of this building or any other building, you'd have to go in front of some city council or community board or something, and there's probably even a code that says a building this big can have a sign that's no more than this many square feet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all about keeping these signs small, so it's all real tasteful, right? Not in Times Square. Times Square, they want the opposite. They want it to be tasteless, you know. Big signs for dancing girls, signs for Broadway shows, signs for anything and everything, right? And that's thought to be the character of Times Square. So here comes the New York Times. They hire one of the best architects in the world, a guy named Renzo Piano, who's a modernist and a minimalist in this case. Renzo Piano designed a building, a skyscraper, which is beautiful, and one of the reasons it's beautiful is that it's made almost entirely of glass. His idea was that modern journalism should be transparent, and the activities of the New York Times should also be transparent. So it's this beautiful glass tower, glass on all sides, every single office open from floor to ceiling to the outside world. And of course, if you're in those offices, you like getting the view and everything, so it's nice for everyone. However, in terms of environmental sustainability, it turns out that all glass buildings have problems. They let heat out in the winter and they collect heat in the summer. So to mitigate that, Renzo Piano in his studio designed a whole series of screens that go up every side of the building that consist of all these parallel porcelain rods, okay? So remember, I was trained as a graphic designer, just like some of the people in this room. I didn't know anything about Times Square. I got trained in Ohio. I'd never been to Times Square. So I didn't know anything about Times Square, didn't know anything about modernist architecture, didn't know anything about heat retention or environmental standards, didn't know anything about porcelain rods, And so, yet you find yourself in a room taking all these notes about these things and trying to make head or tail of them. And then they say, well, here's the problem. It's a glass building. It has to have a big sign on it. And sort of there's nowhere to stick the sign except on these porcelain rods. And so I had this idea, which is you just paint the porcelain rods, or you change the color of the porcelain rods, and then that kind of makes a hidden sign on it somewhere, right? But it turns out that the rules are you can't paint the sign of the building. The sign has to be attached to the building. They didn't want people doing these tasteful painted signs. They wanted signs stuck on the building, big signs stuck in the building. So the New York Times, because they have a little bit of clout in New York, managed to kind of back them down and say, we're just going to put one big sign in the building. It's just the logo, okay? And New York State, who actually controlled this ordinance, said okay with them. So they had to come all the way up here to Albany to get that sorted out. But then the idea of how you would stick a sign on the building and not have it interfere, say, with the views of the people on the inside of the building who are on the back side of the sign became the big question. So you can see that in this little drawing, in the upper right-hand corner, there's one little thing that kind of is like a roundy thing with a thing sticking out. That's sort of what we ended up doing. What we did was we took the logo for the New York Times and divided it up into what I think is 930 little pieces. Each one of those little pieces gets stuck onto these rods, and when you look at them all together, they make the logo. And Tracy Cameron, who Gene knows, actually figured out exactly where all those pieces would go. So that's why I've been doing this for a long time, so I get to be a boss. And so I can just say, I know what will work. Just divide it all up and stick it on the rods and let me know how that works out for you. So someone else, so God bless Tracy Cameron, she sorted this whole thing out for me. But so this is one of her drawings that she tried to figure out exactly how big it would have to be. Oh, these darn rods, by the way, weren't even evenly spaced. They sort of changed their spacing a little bit. The whole thing was just kind of like, trying to play football in the mud. I don't know, it was just like, I don't know, it was not easy. So at any rate, but we ended up going in this direction. So here's these little things we call duck bills that are stuck on those rods. Here they are in the sign shop where they're putting them together. Here's a life-size version of this thing getting assembled off-site. And then one day, we did some tests where we did some little models that I could hold in my hand. Then we did a big full-size test where we just did a letter E, as I recall, and looked at that at some different times of day. And then came the week where this thing was going to be installed. And all along, the New York Times had said, will this really work? Will you be able to kind of read this lettering? And I said, I think so, but I mean, there's no way of knowing until you actually do it, I suppose. But the one thing that I think there's some video of me actually telling this story in detail, so I may as well go ahead and say the exciting part. My original idea was to make these things white, the same color as the rods. And I thought this would be like, if you guys know what blind embossing is, it's like when the paper is raised up and so it's there and it's not there. It's classy, right? So I thought it would be like a blind embossed logo on the building. And I thought it would be really cool because if it was sunny, it would cast a shadow. If it wasn't sunny, it would look a different way at night. Would it be there or not? Who knows? And I remember, and I thought it was like almost like a dynamic sign that would change all the time but it wouldn't rely on electricity. It would just rely on Mother Nature and sunshine to change. And I got and there was some meeting where I was getting progressively more exciting about this idea of mine. And the head of the New York Times, this guy named Arthur Sulzberger, was there, and he said, let me just clarify this. You're proposing that the sign not be visible all the time. And I said, yeah, that's the cool part, right? And he just said, well, he said, I think it is an interesting idea, but I actually think, because it's our building, the sign should be visible. And moreover, he said, I think because it's black on the newspaper, the logo should be black on the building. And I said, well, you're probably right. So that's what we ended up doing. Here are some of the 930 black things stuck on those porcelain rods. And this is how it looks, actually, if you look at it directly across the street, which most people don't. Most people look at it from down below. And when you look at it down below, all those individual duck bills all kind of merge into what looks like solid letters. However, if you're on the other side, you just get this ghosted back sort of sense that you're on the inside of the New York Times. And if any of you guys have ever been to New York, the view these people have is of the Port Authority bus terminal anyway. So I think they should be grateful to have some beautifully drawn fraktur letters in reverse, kind of obscuring their view partially. But the day that they were installing this, I was on a bus going up 8th Avenue to a meeting, and then I remembered, I think they might be putting the sign up. And I switched over to the east side of the northbound bus, and sure enough, there it was. And if you ever get a chance to do anything like that, it is really, really thrilling, I have to admit. To not know for sure whether it'll work and see that it worked. I almost grabbed the person next to me and said, "Oh, it works, it works. Look, looking at this in the New York Times." So this is the biggest typography I've ever done in my life anywhere. So my partner Paula Scher, who's had an exhibit here and has spoken here at St. Rose, and told me, by the way, she said, "You're going to have so much fun. Everyone is so great up there. You're really going to love it." She told me that, actually. So, and it's true. It's true. Thank you. Paula, one time, I go to her for help. She sits right across from me. We don't have offices, like I said, so she sits directly across from me. And one time I was really having trouble with a project. I said, I've got this great idea, but I just can't make it work. And I showed her all the versions of it that I kept trying to make it work this way and trying to make it work that way and trying to make it work the other way. And she said, well, maybe it's a bad idea. And that was sort of something that I took to heart. Also, her husband, Seymour Quast, has a famous quote, which is, if you're digging a hole and it's in the wrong place, digging it deeper doesn't help. And I on occasion, I sort of will start to dig deeper holes. So for this presentation, for the first time anywhere, I'm going to show a totally failed idea that only was seen up till now by the client who commissioned it. And then I'll show you the idea that they actually, when we finally gave up, what we actually did. It's for a building on Columbus Circle called the Museum of Arts and Design. MAD, M-A-D, Museum of Arts and Design. They had bought a building on Columbus Circle that had been there since the early 60s. They bought it for $1 from the city of New York with the promise that they would install this museum dedicated to arts, design, and craft objects. Vases, chairs, usable art that can be common objects that are transformed in a multitude of ways by the ingenuity of various artists and craftspeople. They hired an architect named Brad Klupfel of Allied Works in Portland, Oregon, to redesign the building to make it habitable for their museum. The building that they bought was designed by Edward Durrell Stone, considered by some the ugliest building in New York for years. The minute it was going to be changed, though, everyone decided that they loved it, and there was a big battle about whether it could be changed at all. That's how it is, though, right? You sort of don't like this thing, then someone's going to change it, and you say, "Oh, don't change that, my thing, I'm used to it," right? So there was a big fight about changing Edward Durrell Stone's building, because what Brad wanted to do, and not unreasonably if you ask me, was cut a lot of slots in this completely opaque facade so that light could come in and illuminate the galleries inside, right? And he had this really ingenious scheme where the slots would go not only on the outside of the building, but also go inside the building and connect up floors and ceilings so light would pass through not just from the outside to the inside, but between floors as well. And he did this great diagram showing how all these little lines would interconnect. And I was really, really, really enchanted with this diagram. And I said, I came back from our meetings that we got our brief, and with the charge to design a logo for the Museum of Arts and Design, I said, this is the key to the whole thing. We have to figure out one thing, which is how we can use straight lines to draw the name of the museum in a single connected line, just like this is. That was my idea. It's a great idea, I have to admit. It's such a great idea. So we did it, but this is what we had to do. First of all, it didn't work with MAD. So we said, well, museum, everyone knows it's a museum. Let's just have it be about arts and design. And then let's have the plus sign between the A and the D be sort of the connecting thing. So it's like and. It's not either or, but it's and. Arts and design. A plus D. That's your new logo, right? And so you see that thing on the left sort of looks a little like an A. The thing on the right sort of looks a little like a D. The thing in the middle does look like a plus sign. I'll defend that. And it is one interconnected line, very much like, I would say, his interconnected line he had here, right? And I thought, they will only have one question when they see this, which is, Michael, how can we thank you? So their question was not that, but instead it was, so we're changing the name of the museum? And I said, no. The museum isn't going to be changed from Museum of Arts and Design. It's just going to be changed. It'll still be called that, but the logo now will be A plus D. And they said, but people call us MAD now, M-A-D. And I said, well, but they could call you this new thing now too if we sort of did it hard enough. And I said, but don't worry, we're going to sort of like make it so relentless that of course they'll do it. So we said, look, it can be just like all the things in the museum are different colors and different shapes and different materials. We could do A and D in different colors and different materials, different things. And can you imagine, you have stationery and folders. And I must have tried to present this 3 or 4 times, and every time I came back to my designer, said, we just have to make more stuff. They don't see how it would work. They don't see how great this is. We'll make more mock-ups of folders, mock-ups of shopping bags, anything, right? And you have to admit, you're getting used to it, aren't you? You are, right? Yeah, you're sort of about to go along with it. And then finally, there just came a time where I said, well, it's that definition of madness, right, that's attributed to Freud. It's like doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And I said that we have to stop the madness on this, and we just have to do it. And I said, for everything, this whole premise is, let's assume this whole premise is wrong. Okay? The only thing that's right about it, the only thing I sort of like is the idea that these things could have different things filling them in. That sort of seems like the museum, but this whole idea of changing their name to this thing based on this thing is just not going to work. So instead, why don't we do something else? And I sat down with one of my designers and I said, it's just really simple, made out of, it's a square building, it's on Columbus Circle. What if we just take squares and circles, make the whole thing out of that? There's Columbus Circle, right? There's the square building. And not only that, but the Edward Durrell Stone Building was based on these kind of like circles and intersecting, so it sort of seemed like it had some potential. So right down there in the lower left-hand corner, you see this little thing. I said, could we do a whole alphabet where there's only based on 2 things, squares and circles? And you see right up above that, I wrote, instead of stop the madness, start the madness. And that basically is, you know that it works when everything else just was easy after that. We went back and said, okay, this is going to be your logo. It's a square and a circle, right? These 2 primary forms. Forget about this like line, right, that kind of connects up this complicated thing. We're going to base it on simplicity. Okay, we take 3 circles, we put them in squares, we do that, bang. What does that say? M-A-D, right? You don't have to change your name. Your name is Mad. You can pronounce it. It's really easy, right? Museum of Arts and Design. It's so simple. And then that thing that everyone liked about the other thing, you can kind of like do it in these different colors and shapes and make it out of different materials. It's even better, to tell you the truth, because these big fat letters have more area to work with, right? And then we can make a whole alphabet built on exactly the same premise. And then, so instead of just a logo, you have a whole alphabet where you can write all sorts of things. New York City is mad, let's go mad, get your mad on, all sorts of stuff like that. Go mad, art is mad, design is mad. And the idea would be people would just see this alphabet and associate it with the museum. So they'd have a 26-letter logo in a way. So they did banners, all this printed material. We actually did this as a font so you could type it. It's not you could actually read really long passages of it if you sort of had to, but it's really just a classic kind of display face for headlines, not for text, I would say. There it is in the front door of the revolving door at the front of the museum. They use it on products in the gift shop. They use it on, there was that shopping bag that everyone always gets so excited about. It's a nice repeat pattern, actually. You can sort of see it on boxes and things. And it actually sort of looks like crafts, and it actually reminds people of the museum in a way. Neckties, if you want them. If you want to go all the way like that. Then if you can read this, you are mad. That was there. They suggest, the gift shop lady wanted that because she's always thought this was a hard-to-read typeface. So the lesson was, sometimes even if you love your idea, you have to be ready to surrender it, because it's only through surrender that you can kind of like find the real truth. And then finally, doing a little extra always pays off in the end. I'm really lucky at Pentagram, the firm I work for, because I don't have a boss. All the partners there operate independently, and all the partners are designers. All of us come to work every day hoping to do some great design work. It's nice to make money, and it's nice to do some work that gets you some recognition, so you're able to come up to St. Rose and meet some wonderful people and have a nice reception and give a talk like this. But really what we want to do is just kind of like get something down that really sort of like seems to work. And a lot of that has to do with just, I have friends who have worked in places where basically design was seen as like commercial art, basically a service industry that was designed first to make money And then if you could have some creative satisfaction, that would be a bonus, right? And what happens there is there's a limit to how much you can work on anything and how much you can never give away things for free, because that defeats the whole purpose. If you think you need to work, if you think, for instance, if I wanted to say, if I went in and I said, look, I think I've got this thing totally wrong, I need to start from scratch, if I had a boss who cared about how much money I was making, he would say, you can't do that. You've already spent all the budget on this bad idea, so go in and sell that one more time, even if a good idea is better. It sounds crazy, but that's what I hear. I've been working in the same job for 20 years, but I hear these things happen in other places. But what I've learned, though, is that being generous, actually, being ready to give something away, being able to do a little bit extra, always pays off in the end. Every time I've sort of messed something up, it's because I sort of gave up too early or got too stingy with what I was parsing out. And so as an example of that, I'll show you this project we did for this foundation down in New York that started out as a completely pro bono job. The organization is the Robin Hood Foundation. They had something called the Library Initiative. And the purpose of the Library Initiative was to enlist a whole bunch of different architects to redo libraries in public elementary schools in the 5 boroughs of Manhattan, or the 5 boroughs of New York, Manhattan, but mostly Brooklyn, the Bronx, Staten Island, and Queens. And most of these libraries were in depressed areas where the kids were sort of at risk for dropping out of school. And the idea of rehabbing the library was, if you couldn't change the whole school, if you could only change one room, the room that sort of was potentially the place where you could have the most impact was the school library, because all the kids would use the library at one time or another. So a lot of these libraries kind of looked like this or much worse. They enlisted brilliant, great architects, all young architects, to kind of come in and fix these libraries up. And they asked me whether I'd be willing to just do the logo for this project. Now, the chances are your school library didn't have a logo, and it would seem perfectly fine to you. The reason this effort needed a logo was it was being funded all by private donations, and the private money that was funding it, all those banks and hedge fund guys and foundations, all had to feel that they were giving it to some big effort, and the logo, in a way, was for that, not for the kids. And so I sort of thought, well, I've done this before. I know how to do a logo, and so we did a logo. It was actually a very simple thing based on the word library with an exclamation mark replacing the I. So it just seemed like a regular library, but it had a surprise inside, which is what would be true with these libraries, right? And so you can see we sort of had all these ideas about things you could do with the exclamation mark and stuff you would do with the logo. So it basically looks like that. Straightforward typeface with a exclamation mark in place of the I. And these were all like notes I was taking during my meetings, and a lot of times it was just fun things. The architects would say, well, we want to use the logo in the library in some funny ways, and so Renette Riley there on the left said, well, what if, we said, what if you used exclamation marks as the pulls on the door? And so we did a lot of stuff like that. But one architect I was working with suggested, you see up there on the upper right, he made an observation. He said, well, it's funny, these libraries, they're for elementary school kids, but a lot of them are in really old buildings that have very high ceilings. Nice that they have high ceilings, but the elementary school kids can only reach about 5.5 feet up at the most. And so 5.5, 6 feet up. So that would mean that in a 12-foot tall building, there'd be 6 feet of space between the top shelf and the ceiling. And he said, do you have an idea of what we could do with that? And I remember thinking for a moment, well, this is not really, I was supposed to do a logo. Now they're asking me about this space above the shelves, And then, in fact, the architect said, could we just repeat the logo over and over again up there? Now, that sounded like awful to me, It's like bad enough that the library has a logo at all, but to have it repeated over and over again, potentially 6 feet tall, mind you, that just sounded like the worst idea I'd ever heard in my life. So I said, no, what if we did like a mural of some sort? And then he said, like a painted mural? I said, no, that's like, I think that'd be too complicated. What if we just commissioned a photographer to take a bunch of pictures of the kids in the school, and we just do sort of montage, an overscale montage of these kids kind of running around the top of the shelves, almost like a frieze, like a classical frieze, like the heroes of the Parthenon arrayed around the top there. And so this shows exactly the condition I just described. And this shows what we did for that library where my friend said, what would you do over the shelf? So those are like giant kids up there. They'd be like, they'd be 12 feet tall actually if they were up there. And so it's great, the juxtaposition of these giant mythic kind of kids up above, all posed with books, all posed kind of interacting as they would in a library. And then the real kids are below. And so this ended up being a lot of fun. My wife took the pictures. The principal and the librarian of the school recruited the kids to, amongst kids with perfect attendance records, and the kind of like star pupils got this honor of being on the wall of fame up there. And it ended up being like a little idea that we did that was sort of like no one even gave us permission to do this. It was just this thing that we hashed between us and the architect. And the thing that was funny was, as other librarians from other schools in this project saw this one, they said, oh, I want a library like the one in East New York where it has the mural. Can you just come and take pictures of my kids and put them up there? And then we decided, no, we didn't want to do that because we didn't want to do the same thing twice. But we wanted to do the same idea. So then we just started coming up with as many different ways to do that idea. So we found an artist named Lynn Pauley, and she did these paintings of the kids. There's a guy named Peter Arkell, who's sort of a graphic novelist, kind of cartoonist, who did these interviews with the kids all in black and white, drew them really carefully and kind of counterposed them with speech bubbles and things. There's a designer named Raphael Square who took all the subjects you get in the different books and kind of did silhouettes of them to kind of create this miasma cloud effect above the shelves. Christoph Niemann. This happened in 3 different stages. In the first stage, I was afraid, we didn't have any permission to do it at all, and I wanted to keep it really low risk, so I asked my wife, who's not even really a photographer, to take the pictures. She's a good photographer, but she's like not like a professional. She's as good as a professional photographer. She didn't make her living as a photographer, so she agreed to take these pictures. She's good with kids, and so she took these pictures. The second wave, we sort of had more people do it. The third time we were doing it, we just asked whoever was on our wish list. So this is Christoph Niemann, who's an illustrator whose work appears every week in the New Yorker magazine. And you can see he did these great cartoons where he integrated books and the Dewey Decimal designation for the subject into portraits of Lincoln, the flag, eagles, Moby Dick, et cetera, always with books somewhere. Stefan Sagmeister worked on this one, kind of taking one of his sayings and kind of rendering it in kind of manga. And then Myra Coleman, Tibor Coleman's wife, who's a notable children's book illustrator in her own right, did this great installation with objects up above the shelves there. And what was funny was that these murals, of which I sort of, my role was at most just being the art director and really just running interference so that these great illustrators and artists could do what they did best, ended up being the dominant motif in these libraries. And I learned that when I would go to grand openings they would have of the libraries. Every time one of these would open, I would get a little folded piece of construction paper, sometimes with the logo sort of reproduced with varying degrees of accuracy inside, produced like on a mimeograph machine in the principal's office, and it would say, you're invited to the grand opening of the library, the new Robin Hood Library at PS 10, 9:00 a.m., and you'd go there and there'd be like balloons on the outside, there'd be student ambassadors that would greet you as you'd come in, there'd be poems that they had written in honor of the new library. And this is, my wife took those pictures. This is another one where she took pictures too, around the periphery there. And, and like the big donors from the banks and the hedge funds and the telecom companies and the publishers would come. The head of the Board of Education would come. And I would kind of lurk around on the outskirts, and people would say, well, who are you? And I said, well, I'm the graphic designer. They'd say, well, and what did you do? And I said, well, I did the logo. And they said, what's the logo? And I said, the logo is that thing on the door on the outside with the exclamation. And they say, oh, right. And then, then I'd say, and I help with those things up there. And they say, you took those pictures? You did those drawings? I said, no, not really. I just kind of help with that. But and so, but actually, so in a way, this thing had no glory attached to it in a way, no real money attached to it, but it was just great for these moments actually where the thing would open up. And I remember these grand openings were just so moving, and I remember being in one of the libraries at the end of the day, And the librarian showed me how she turned out the lights in the library. And she said that the last light she turned off was the one that illuminated the mural up above the shelves. She said that's so I can always remember why we do all this stuff, right? And so that's why we do all this stuff. You do a little bit extra for people, it comes back to you. If you kind of come up with your own process that lets you do your own work, your own way, and do it in a way where you're able to kind of be as generous as you can with your ideas, it'll always pay off. I can promise you that, and I wish you the best of luck with that challenge. Each and every one of you, thank you. Anyone that wants to leave now can leave. Anyone that wants to ask questions can raise their hands. Do they have any? No, the first question is always so hard. You have no questions at all? Oh, where? Got it. Okay, yes.
What made you love it in the first place?
Sorry, say that again?
What made you love it in the first place?
Graphic design, you mean? Yeah. The question is, what made me love graphic design in the first place? Some of you guys who are even studying graphic design may have made it all the way into St. Rose without really knowing for sure what you wanted to do, perhaps. Some of you are still trying to figure out what you wanted to do. I actually applaud that. All three of my kids, who are all college age, or post-college age at this point, are all sort of luckily got to college without knowing exactly what they wanted to do. Unfortunately, I decided really early on that I wanted to do graphic design. And I think I remember what made me want to do it was something that happened when I was actually pretty young. I think I might have been 9 or 10. I grew up in suburban Cleveland, Ohio. Suburban Cleveland, Ohio in the late 60s, early 70s was not a hotbed of design. It is still to this day not really a hotbed of design, but it really wasn't a hotbed of design back then. My dad, however, was made his living selling printing presses. So he sold, like, if you've ever been to a print shop, he sold Heidelbergs and Mealy's. If you needed a Heidelberg printing press in northeastern Ohio in 1969, you had to go through Lenny Beirut to get it, basically. And actually, I sort of had no idea. He was like a salesman under a ton of stress. I had no idea. He kept it so under wraps. But, you know, if he was able to sell a couple printing presses, we could pay our mortgage on our house. And, you know, eventually his 3 sons all got to go to college, you know, because he was selling these things one by one, talking people into investing a lot of money in big hunks of metal. God bless him. So I was out with my dad one day, and he pointed at a forklift truck. And on the side of the forklift truck, it said Clark. And Clark is a manufacturer. I'm not sure they're national, but they were the guys you would buy forklift trucks from. And he said, that's clever, isn't it? And I looked at it and just said C-L-A-R-K. And I said, why is it clever? He said, well, don't you see? The way they did it so the L goes underneath the leg of the A and kind of lifts it up. And it did. It was specially drawn. It was a logo. It was a logo where the L was tucked, you know, where the one leg of the A came up and the L came around and lifted it. And I remember thinking, you know, how did you know that? And I remember, are there more things like that? You know, are these things all around? How many people have looked at this thing and never noticed that? That's, you know, and in fact, when I was saying before about being generous, to me, that's like a gift. It's like a present, you know? I mean, the Clark equipment company, all they need to do is put their damn name on the side of their thing, and people know it comes from Clark. Instead, someone went through the trouble of adding this other little special thing to make it specially for them. So it could only be the Clark that sells forklift trucks, not the Clark bar, you know, or not, you know, not any other kind of Clark. So that was what was so great. And I remember thinking, you know, wow, I would really, you know, that seemed like the greatest thing in the world to me, to sort of have something out in public somewhere that people could see, that somehow had some little bit of kind of like fun and ingenuity and wit and imagination and creativity in it. So I was really, really good at drawing in high school, as maybe some of you were. And And everyone says, "Oh, you're going to be an artist, right? You want to be an artist?" And I sort of say, "Oh yeah, I like art, and maybe I should be an artist." But I always thought, like, artists, that just always seems so like you'd go off and I used to go to the Cleveland Museum of Art, where they have beautiful art on the, it's like incredible paintings. It's one of the greatest collections in the United States and the world. So incredible examples of art from all periods, from all parts of the world, including America, that I found really inspiring. But I remember thinking, oh, it takes so long, you just do one of them, then it's in a museum, and people have to go to the museum to see it. The guy that did that Clark logo, it's on every single Clark truck in the world, and everyone gets to see it. You don't have to pay a penny to see it. You don't have to put on fancy clothes to see it. It's just there, and so, but like, it's still, I thought, okay, maybe and I was like trying to work out in my mind. I remember even like in junior high school, I started doing posters for school plays and things, and I remember thinking, well, maybe the way it works is like if you're a real artist, like someone will come to you, like you would be like, say, Robert Rauschenberg or Franz Klein or someone, and someone would say, hey, Robert Rauschenberg, my company needs like a logo for its forklift truck company. Could you like squeeze that in between your paintings you're doing for mass, And so I couldn't figure out how. And then I happened to find a book in our high school library called Your Future in Graphic Design / Commercial Art, and then all of a sudden it had a name. Oh, this thing I want to do has a name. It's called graphic design. It was like being sick with something, going to a doctor and getting it diagnosed. I just feel funny. I feel different. I shouldn't feel this way. And they said, no, it's normal to feel that way because you have, graphic design-itis or something, ism. And so I remember being so happy. So I was 14 or 15 when that happened. I didn't know a single graphic designer in the world. The only people I knew who practiced graphic design were the people who were named in this book, some of whom were fairly famous graphic designers, some of whom are, this book was from the 60s, so some of them are a little bit more obscure. But I decided then and there that's what I wanted to do. So that's when I fell in love with it when I saw that forklift truck logo. And I have to admit, my favorite thing in the world is to just keep falling in love over and over again with it. And one of the reasons that I love working in this field is that there's so many, I think right now there are more people doing really great graphic design all around the world in different ways that I've had the privilege of working with sometimes. Some of my collaborators on that library project, Marion Banchis, who illustrated the Seduction poster in the gallery across the street. People are doing great work, and it's just so fun to kind of be turned on by what they're doing and just remind you why you loved it in the first place. So I can take maybe one more question if all the answers are going to be long, long speeches like that one. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that autopsy on your failed project.
Yeah.
Great. I guess it's a two-part question. Is there a client out there that has been eluding you that you really love to work for? And is there a project that you didn't get, and could you comment on what the designer did with it?
So the first one I actually, I think I might actually be doing the project that I really wanted. So it's, I'll tell you, the first question was, is there some project I always wanted to do? And every once in a while I'll get asked to, I'll be considered as a possible designer on a project, and I'll I'll know exactly what I'm going to do. I get so excited because I know exactly what I'm going to do, and I get all worked up about it, and then inevitably I don't get that job. I don't get it. So one of the, that happened probably maybe 10 years ago. I got called about doing a sign system for the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum. And I had an idea that at that point seemed really revolutionary to me. It seems a little bit, I think I've done it a few times for other people since, but my idea was to do every single sign in a different typeface. And then have on every single sign, like it would say men's, it would say women's, it would say coat check, it would say electrical closet, it would say this way up, it would say, maximum capacity 300 people. Every single one would be in a different typeface, and every single sign would have a little paragraph explaining the typeface, the year it was designed, the name of the designer, so that no matter, every time you had to go to the bathroom, every time you'd have to go into the electrical closet, you'd have to learn something about typography, right, whether you wanted to or not. And I thought, you can't do this for the New York Times. They wouldn't put up with that. You can't do this for anyone, the Morgan Library, you can't do this for an airport, but you can do it for the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum of the Smithsonian Institution. And so I didn't get that job. Someone else got it, and they did a perfectly fine job without using my idea, which I didn't. But then I just got interviewed actually about, they're expanding again, and I was talking to one of the curators, I said, you know, I had the best idea and I described it. They said, oh, we should have done that. Well, we could do that this time, she said, getting me all excited again. So we'll see. Maybe we'll try it again this time. So maybe dreams do come true. We'll see whether that works. So, no, I just, you know, in the last couple of days, I've been doing a lot of traveling. And Gene mentioned that for 15 years or so, I was a consultant to United Airlines. And one of the things that was great about working with United Airlines is that they hired us to be their identity consultant, but they already had a great logo designed by a designer named Saul Bass in 1968. He had done this stylized U made of 4 different shapes that I just loved. And when they hired us, we came back with a solution that sort of made that logo and just celebrated that logo. And I remember they were surprised. They said, oh, we thought you were going to do another logo. And I said, no, this logo is just like so great that you have to, that we just have to figure out a way to just kind of blow it all the way out and use it everywhere. And so for 15 years, we figured out all these different things to do with the Saul Bass logo. And then United announced they're going to merge with Continental. And the CEOs of United and Continental, I think, got into a room. Well, I'm almost positive it was sure like this. They got into a room, and they sort of just decided, okay, let's make a deal. And they said, okay, the headquarters of Continental is in Houston. The headquarters of United is in Chicago. Let's have the CEO of this newly merged company be the guy from Continental, but let's have the headquarters be in Chicago so that Continental gets like the leadership, but then they all have to, their trade-off is they have to move to Chicago, right? Okay, right, okay. And there was probably a lot of things like that. Then finally they said, well, what about the logo? I said, okay, here's how it's gonna go. We're gonna keep the name United, but we're gonna combine it with the Continental logo. So it'll be the Continental logo, which is a globe, combined with the United name. And to me, this is, you know what a jackalope is? It's just such a bad, it's just such a tragic idea. It's so sad. And, and you can sort of see, it just seems like genius, right? It's like you get something, I get something. And I don't mind if they, move 1,000 people to Chicago. I really don't care. But mess around with Saul Bass's logo, that actually hurts me. And so, I've been doing a lot of flying in the past few days, and all of it, in fact, was on United. I flew from overseas on United and back again, and I flew on 2 planes that were my paint job. The paint job that has the Saul Bass logo that I sort of take personally. And then the last 2 I took were on new paint job planes. And it just drives me crazy to be on those planes. It really does. It just drives me completely nuts. And what's funny is that I know the designers that actually implemented that job, and they actually have done as good a job as you could do. It's like Ready, Set, Cook, and someone says, okay, you're a master chef. I'm going to really challenge you. I'm going to give you like a head of lettuce, some mayonnaise, and a ping pong ball. And I want you just to knock me out with a delicious dish. And they've actually done their best, trying to figure out a way to kind of make all that edible, but it just doesn't, it's hard to swallow that ping pong ball, that's all. For me particularly, that's sometimes, I'm very forgiving when I see most, like my partners tend to be much more judgmental. They say, do you see that horrible piece of thing? And I say, oh, it's not so bad, you'll get used to it. But I'm gonna have trouble getting used to this thing. I take it really personally. Next question on more pleasant subject, yes?
Have you ever been in a situation in your career where you felt kind of stuck and you didn't have a lot of room for advancement? And I guess the second part of my question is there any advice you could provide to any of us who might be in this situation? A lot of ambitions and attempts to learn new things.
Part of the challenge of being, if you choose to be are you a graphic designer? Okay, so if you do that, but you're sort of signing up for, it's a little bit of a problem. I mean, say what you will about Robert Rauschenberg, but he sort of got to decide what he did every day, right? And then he found enough people who supported the idea that he was able to feed himself every day miraculously. Not every artist is so lucky. Graphic designers are always at the mercy of other people, or you think you are, actually. And it's like, if you work for you know, all the people that work for me are at my mercy in theory, you know. They're all working for someone else. That person is me. Some people work for people who are even nicer than me, presumably. Some people work for people that are even meaner or more unpleasant than I am. But they're all, you know, each one of them, their agency is somehow inhibited by that, right? So you can sort of feel like you're stuck because of that. You can also get stuck by your clients. You sort of think, oh, my client will let me do this fun thing. I have this great idea. My client won't let me do it, right? The only thing I can say, and I've had a very boring career path. I worked in my first job for 10 years, and I worked in my second job for 20 years. There is no third job as of yet, right? Who knows? But in each one of those jobs, I had those moments, and there's the only advice there's two things you can do. One thing is you can just kind of change everything, and I know people that have done that. And the thing to remember is that you're always like, there's no law saying you have to keep doing what you're doing, you know? And people, I know people who will just change everything at the drop of a hat and with such boldness and courage, and it always works in their favor. I'm temperamentally not like that, or else I wouldn't have worked only in these two jobs in the past 30 years. I do something a little bit different where I just sort of like just push harder. I push myself harder. I just kind of like go back and figure I'm just like, you know, I'm doing it wrong, or I have to do it a slightly different way. And sometimes, you know, you expect it always to go like that, but sometimes you just kind of go like plateaus in a way. And it's like my partner Paula says, it's like a staircase, you know. It's not just like a straight stair. You can't climb a staircase straight up. You get tired after midway through the second story, no matter how good a shape you were in. It needs landings, right? You come to these landings and then you walk for a while. Then you go in the stairs and you straighten out for a while. Sometimes when you're kind of hitting that thing, you're just on a landing, right? And there's like stairways up ahead in the dark somewhere behind the door, but the stairways are there. And a lot of times the solution is just to kind of like push yourself to do something new. You know, take that. Sometimes if you're stuck on a job, you just have to sort of say, okay, that thing I'm doing, I'm just not going to do it at all anymore. Sometimes you have to turn someplace else for inspiration. Sometimes you just have to challenge yourself to do something that's something just for yourself, to remind yourself that you can do things on your own. There's a lot of different solutions to it. I would recommend to everyone that if you have access to the internet and you know about this site called YouTube, there's a video interview with a guy named Ira Glass, who some of you might know from public radio. He has a show called This American Life. He's the producer of This American Life, and he's a great talker. He has this series of talks that he does about creativity, and he has one of them, and maybe I'll just send Gene the link and you can forward it on to whoever. He has one where he talks about what the curse, sort of, he doesn't call it this, but it's like the curse of being a creative person. And what he says is that if you go into a field like this, you have taste. And one of the frustrating things about having taste is you sort of can tell good from bad. And he says that every good creative person he knows, whether they're, you know, artists or graphic designers or movie makers or musicians or radio producers like him, there's this gap between sort of what they know is good and what they're capable of doing. And what makes them creative, what makes them good is that they can tell that that gap is there. You know, I mean, like people who aren't talented can't tell the gap is there, and they just do something they think, well, isn't this great? And they never improve because they think they've got it right the first time, right? And so what Ira Glass says is, you know, the only thing you can do, he says, trust me, all you can do is just push on through. You just have to keep working and working. You just have to do more work. And I showed you one bad thing that I did, and maybe that's just my count. Maybe I showed you many bad things that I did by your count. But like, you know, I've done a lot of things that ended up in the garbage can. A lot of things that will not be on exhibit across the street or anywhere. And it's because sort of you know, the best hitter in baseball still strikes out 6 out of 10 times. You know, and you just need a lot of swings in order to connect now and then and to figure out what your own style is. So what Ira says is you just have to keep on pushing through, and like you will get better. And to demonstrate it, he plays a terrible, terrible radio interview that he did early in his career. No, he says it's not even early in his career. He'd already been working for 7 or 8 years. It's this terrible interview. And he says, listen, I've been doing this for 7 years and I was still this bad. But like now I really, you know, I win awards for what I do. I really am considered pretty good. And that's just because I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. So, and you know, if you read that book, Malcolm Gladwell has a book called, not The Tipping Point, but Outliers. Is that what it's called? This is his second book. And he says something about like the 100,000 hour rule, is that what it is? Where he sort of calculated how much it takes to be good at anything. And he's a tricky writer, and he sort of can prove things that may or may not be true. But this was fairly persuasive. And he sort of worked out mathematically how long the Beatles had to practice before they became the Beatles, how long anyone had to do anything before they became that. And he sort of worked out it has to be 100,000 hours. That's a lot. If you're starting your career, 100,000 hours sounds, geez, how will I ever do that? But trust me, you can. If you like doing it, and you don't mind, if you like doing it so much that you'll do it badly in hopes that you'll do it better, you'll do it. You will. I did. Yeah.
Who pushed you the most to get you this far in your life, and how did they?
Well, I've had really, really great mentors my whole career. I'm really lucky. And another thing I recommend is kind of don't be afraid to find mentors. And mentors doesn't mean you have to sign them up to work for you. It can just be someone who you watch how they work and you learn from them. They don't even have to know that they're mentoring you for it to be good mentors. So, you know, I did 2 internships when I was in school, one with Chris Pullman, who works up in Boston, who at least someone here studied, a few people may have studied with at Yale when he was a teacher there, but Chris was, when I was an intern at WGBH-TV in Boston, I just would watch how he would talk and how he would sit down and work on a problem. I learned so much from that. I had a boss in Cincinnati when I was interning there that I learned a lot from. And then I think for 10 years I worked for Massimo Vignelli, and he was like some people find him very intimidating. I liked him from the beginning, but he would push people without them even knowing they were being pushed. You just were afraid to, you just really wanted to get it right for him. And you would stay longer and work harder to make sure it was right just because you didn't want him to, to catch you doing it wrong, that's all. So he probably pushed me at a formative part of my career, he probably pushed me the hardest, I would say. He would deny ever pushing me at all, and he never did. He never said, do this 10 times in a row until you've got it right. He just would say, that's okay. Maybe it's if you did this. Then he would do something that would make it be great, And it was his kind of great. It wasn't necessarily my kind of great, but just seeing the difference between something that was okay and something that was really good, and watching it happen was really illuminating. And if you see that happen enough, you either give up, but don't give up, or else you sort of like figure out your own route to make that jump yourself. I think that's really the trick, right? Gene?
Oh, I was just reflecting on something that when you were talking about, the amount of time that you need to spend to really develop your art, and, maybe it is 100,000 hours to practice it, but I think that what kind of portion of that is really devoted to experience and the kinds of experience that you bring into the work, because I think that's a very important message for our students, that they need to get out into the world.
Good. Yeah. So the observation is that experiencing the world is actually a real gift for you as a graphic designer. In fact, I was having a conversation with Vaughn, who's sitting next to you, who's not a graphic designer, but instead is a musician who plays, among other things, the organ in beautiful cathedral spaces in New York City, and I could sort of hold my own slightly with him, because I actually have met a couple of organists and know some people at some cathedrals in New York, and he said, how do you even know any of this stuff? And I said graphic designers, graphic designers don't know, the mechanics of graphic design are like essentially empty vessels, right? Like typography is a great thing, but you have to have words that you're setting, You have to have something that people want to read. It doesn't matter how good the type is if no one wants to read it, And so all of us, we sort of have that curse I said before of needing a client, you need a client, you need a restriction, and those things are actually all incredible opportunities to experience the world. So I've told my kids many times that I had a rotten college education. I really did. The University of Cincinnati, nothing against them, but I took on that like a technical school. I went there and I studied nothing but graphic design. I was single-minded about studying it. I didn't read the great books, never learned anything beyond Algebra 2, or what's more than Algebra 2? What's next up from that? Calculus? What, trig? What's the differential equations is what? Is that algebra 2? Okay, I might have learned a little calculus, but I forgot it now. At any rate, I sort of really poorly educated. But the one thing that I've really taken to is when people ask me what's the favorite thing you're working on, sometimes what I think of, I'm always hesitant to answer because the thing I describe is often less about the work that I'm doing, you know, the idea that I have for the design, and just more the enthusiasm I have for the subject matter. So, you know, to be able to, you know, be in all these different elementary schools, for the library project. You know, for that New York Times project, we got to sit in the room where they decide what's going to be on the front page of the New York Times. You know, and that was just thrilling. I mean, I don't know why, you know, I remember insisting that we do that, so because it would give us insights that we'd need to actually do the signs in the building. But you know, and they were impressed that we were willing to kind of research things that hard. And people always will. They'll never stop you. They'll sort of say, oh, you know, oh, that'd be great if, yeah, I can see why you need to see that, you know. And so, you know, if you just use this, this seemingly harmless profession you have of graphic design as your way of sneaking in anywhere you want to see people do, I mean, I've watched the New York Jets in training. I've been behind the scenes at the Museum of Sex. I've done all these different things, all ostensibly because I'm the graphic designer, and I just, you know, it's important that I sort of view these things to, and, you know, and by God, you know, someone will, you know, what's really funny is one of the ways that I used to, like that thing we did on the front of the New York Times building, I remember being in that front page meeting, and they actually literally have like a big thing that's shaped like the front page of the New York Times, and they start to stick the things where they go, right? And I remember thinking, you know, the skyscraper building is sort of shaped like the front page. There are all these lines that are just like all the lines of type, and then you figure out what goes on that surface. And I remember explaining it to someone there, you know, this is what our challenge is. They were like, oh, you're exactly right, you know, and sometimes if you enter someone else's world, that gives them a way of understanding what it is you're doing. You don't have to talk about names of typefaces, you don't have to talk about letter spacing, negative space, you know, contrast, composition. You don't have to use any of this voodoo stuff that people will freak out if you try to like get them to understand it. Instead, you can talk about it in their terms, and they love that. And that's actually the best thing of all. You know, I've been able to get my kids jobs everywhere because, you know, my older daughter's in law school, and I've worked for 3 different law firms as a graphic designer, but I've met all the partners, and they all think, you know, because I've insisted on being in meetings where they're talking about big matters of law, because I need to like decide what typeface their website should be, you know. And so, you know, you really can go anywhere and do anything with this particular profession. It is not true. I guess if you're a plumber or something, you get to go into interesting bathrooms and kitchens. You know, if you're a fireman, different kinds of buildings will burn down. You see different people running out of the buildings. You know, and these are exciting professions that are interesting and take skill. But being a graphic designer is, you know, it's one where it's nothing but what you bring to it and what you see in the outside world. And that's what makes it great. Yeah, one more question. Personal, okay.
Okay, 90 notebooks.
Yeah.
At what point did you realize what a goal those notebooks were to you?
I have to admit, I've never, I mean, I have one right here. You can judge for yourself whether it's gold or whatever it is. But I will say this goes back to Ira Glass's advice. There is something good about forcing yourself to do certain habits. And one of the classes that I've taught at Yale for 5 years was this thing called the 100-Day Project, where I said the assignment was just you had to do something for 100 days and document it. Do the same thing over and over again for 100 days and somehow record it and present it after the 100 days were over. And it was a baffling sort of project, and part of what made it baffling was that I almost didn't care what they did. And almost like it could be about graphic design, it could be not about graphic design, but somehow the discipline of making yourself do something every day was really interesting to me. And I remember reading about how certain writers work, and writers really fascinate me. And like, you know, John Cheever, who's a writer who actually grew up in, who lived in my part of Westchester County, a little south of here, used to get up every day. When he lived in Manhattan, he lived in this tiny little apartment building. He lived in this tiny apartment in a big apartment building. He would get up every day, put on a jacket and tie, and put a hat on, go downstairs on the elevator, go into a cellar where he used to write, and then because it was so hot, he would take off the jacket, the tie, his shirt, and his pants, and write in his underwear until 5 o'clock, at which point he would get dressed again, put everything back on, including the tie, and go home and kiss Mary Cheever and ask what's for dinner. Hard day at the office, honey? Oh, yeah. You know, so, but that kind of discipline is its own sort of thing. And so I think for me, having these notebooks, I was like, so now it's a fetish, you know, it's a real compulsion for me. If I go to a meeting, I don't have the notebook, people, you know, I'll sort of think, oh, you know, someone might say something and I won't be able to write it down in the notebook, and then you know, then it'll be gone forever, you know. And then people say, well, here's some paper, and it's like, oh, you know, paper, you know, you know. And so, you know, and you know, you know from the poster, I did lose 2 of the notebooks, one of which had only just started, another one which is almost done, and the one that's almost done had like pure gold in it. I swear to God, proof about who designed certain logos in my office that I could point to, but now it's gone somehow. I think, yeah, I think I got to around maybe. Well, I tell the kids who are doing the 100-day project, it's like when you get to around 2025, you sort of realize that either this is boring or why am I doing this? And then if you sort of push through there, you sort of start to get in a groove, and if you get to 50, you'll be okay. Most people can quit that project, and most people who bail do it before they get to 25. The people who do it to 25 take it all the way through. So it's just, if you're prone to compulsive behavior, and not everyone is, thank God, but if you are, and if you can channel those compulsions to things that actually have some use for your daily life, I also like, I like have to jog every morning for 3 miles, slower and slower and slower as I get older. But that's actually, I'm told, is healthy for at least your respiratory system. Not so good for your knees, ankles, and every other part of your body, doctors have told me. But you know, I brought my shoes here, so I'll do it tomorrow morning before I go. But I think certain compulsions are good, and this is, for me, this is a compulsion. So I recommend it if it works for you. And if it doesn't work for you, you'll find something else that works for you if you look hard enough. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. I'm very honored that you're here.